This is the program written for reading the elements of a two-dimensional array and to print it. The program is written and compiled using the compiler TurboC. So after the initial portion of the program, which contains including the .h files and declaration of the variables, the first line is a printf line. The printf statement asks the user to enter the number of rows and columns of the matrix he intends to enter the elements of. That is, the declaration of the array as A1010 does not mean that the array has to have 10 rows and 10 columns. The person can enter an array of maybe 2 rows and 3 columns. In that case, the person has to give the values of m and n as 2 and 3. These values will be scanned with the help of the scanf function. After this is over, the printf statement along with the following nested for loop will read the elements of A, which is followed by the portion which will print the elements. This much portion of the code is responsible for printing the elements that have been entered into the array. So we'll start executing the code line by line, that is executing the program in single step mode. So this is right now we are at that particular line which will print the message, enter the number of rows and columns of the matrix. I'm going to give the number of rows as 2 and the number of columns as 3. So control has been brought to the line following the scanf statement, where the printf statement for entering the elements is written. So using the nested for loop, as of now I'm going to enter the outer for loop. Now I am about to enter the inner for loop, where j is the loop variable. So now I am inside the inner for loop for the first time, and the value of I and j both are 0. So that means when I execute the scanf statement, I am reading A00. So the first value I'm going to enter the element is, I'm going to give the values as consecutive numbers from 1 to 6. So the first element I'm going to enter is 1. Now I'm actually in the second iteration of the for loop, of the inner for loop. So that means I is still 0 and j is 1. So if I execute the statement, I'm actually reading A01. Now I am in the third iteration of the inner for loop, which means I'm going to read A02. Remember, I had given the number of rows as 2 and the number of columns as 3, which means I have 2 rows and 3 columns. That means I can have A varying from A00 to A02 and A10 to A12. So the element 3 I am entering is the first row, third column element. Now I am starting with the second iteration of the outer for loop. You can see the values of I and j being inspected, which shows that I has become 1 and j is actually 3. That is, the reason for that is that I have not yet started with the inner for loop for the second time. I am yet to start the inner for loop for the second iteration of the outer for loop. So with just one step, now if I go and inspect the values, I and j, the values are now the value of I is 1 and the value of j is 0. That is, I am going to enter A10, that is second row first column element. So now I have entered all the values, that is all the 6 values have been entered, and now I am going to print the matrix. Similar to the previous case where I used a nested for loop for entering the elements, again I am using a nested for loop for printing the elements. The only difference is that here the outer for loop contains a group of statements, not just a single statement. The outer for loop contains a group of statements combined with a pair of braces. So initially for I is equal to 0, I'm going to execute the inner for loop for j is equal to 0 to 2. In this case n is equal to 3, so inner for loop will be executed for j is equal to 0 to 2. Only one statement is included in the inner for loop, which is printing the value of aij followed by a space. This is the space that will be followed, that will follow each and every element of a particular row. Once a particular row is over, that is once the inner for loop is over, a new line character will be printed. That is, after a row is printed, a new line character will be printed, and this entire set of statements will be repeated for I is equal to 0 to I less than m. In this case, I is equal to 0 to I less than 2. That is, I is equal to 0 and I is equal to 1. So if I go and see the output window, the first row has already been printed. Now I am about to print the second row. I am about to print the second row. So by this time the entire row has been printed, and the output screen is waiting for a character to be entered. The control comes out of the program. The program has been reset. This is the program that reads the elements of two matrices, adds them, and prints the sum array. The matrices to be added are A and B, and C is the matrix corresponding to the sum. So this part of the program reads matrix A. This part of the program reads matrix A. Similarly, this part reads matrix B. This portion does the summing of A and B. It is a nested for loop which does the summing of all the elements of all the corresponding elements of A and B and stores the sum in the corresponding element of C. At last, the matrix A is printed as the first matrix. The matrix B is printed with the message that it is the second matrix, and the matrix C is printed as the sum of the two matrices. So when you run the program, again, let me take the number of rows as 2 and the number of columns as 3. So I have given 6 elements as the elements of the first array. So it's actually 1, 2, 3 as the elements of the first row and 4, 5, 6 as the elements of the second row. So let me give the second array as, let me say it will start from 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and let the last element be 10. So it gives the message that the first matrix was a 2 by 3 matrix, where the first row contained 1, 2, 3, second row contained 4, 5, 6. Similarly, the second matrix is also printed and the sum of the two matrices is also printed. This is the program to find the transpose of a matrix. The matrix is read, the dimensions of the matrix is initially read. Oh, actually it should have been rows and columns. As usually, row is the primary index and column is the secondary index. So the message should be printed as enter the number of rows and columns of the matrix. So the row number is entered into M, column number is entered into N, and like in the previous case, the matrix AA is red. With this nested for loop, matrix A is red, and this is the part of the code which is responsible for doing the transpose. So I have actually initially declared two matrices, one as A1010 and one as AT1010. AT stands for A transpose. So for inside the nested for loop, I have written ATJI is equal to AIG. That is the part of the code that is responsible for getting the transpose of the original matrix. So at the end, the original matrix is printed. The original matrix is printed here. With this part of the code, the original matrix is printed and the transposed matrix is printed with this part of the code. So when the program is run, initially the number of rows and columns of the matrix will be asked, and this actually means the number of rows and columns of the original matrix. So again I am going to give 2 by 3 matrix. The original matrix is a 2 by 3 matrix. The elements are, so this is the output of the program. Thank you.